Hello and welcome, dear viewers. This is our weekly edition, ATV Special, and I am Zalalem Ibeltal, producer of the program. Nile River is the longest river on earth, and Nile has two major tributaries called the White Nile and the Blue Nile. The majority, more than 80% of the source of the Nile is the Blue Nile, and the Blue Nile River is originated from Ethiopia. However, development in project on the Blue Nile River has been source of controversy among riparian countries. Indeed, in 2011, Ethiopia started to build a project on the Nile called the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It is a $5 billion project, and it's going to be the largest dam in the continent in Africa upon its completion. However, most of the international media, such as BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, and others, focus only on the conflicting side of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, whereas the contribution of the dam for Ethiopia, for the region, and for other riparian countries, including Sudan and Egypt, is overlooked. And this program is dedicated to show you the contribution of the dam for people of the region. So, my guest for today is Mekedlawit Messaye, who is PhD student at Florida International University from the United States of America. She is on Skype. Hello, Mekedlawit. Could you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello.
It's fantastic to see you, Mekedlawit. Let's begin the interview from the very obvious one. And what is the contribution of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam in answering Ethiopia's demand for power? It is a matter of fact that more than 60% of Ethiopians are out of electricity, out of power. So how do you see the potential impact of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam in lifting the people of Ethiopia out of poverty?
Oh, thank you for having me. And that question can be answered from many facets. So first, starting just from the electricity aspect, the current electricity production in Ethiopia is around 4,200, 4,300 megawatts. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam alone would be able to produce 5,150 megawatts. So that's a doubling of the installed electricity capacity of the country. So that's a huge increase on its own. But when you think about access to electricity does not stop at getting access to electricity to homes or getting access to light to homes. Access to electricity means access to healthcare, access to education, access to food and water security, access to industries, and by proxy, job opportunities. Clean and affordable electricity also has a big impact in the climate change endeavors that the country is on. So there are very multiple facets that we can look at. Moreover, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam provides electricity not just to Ethiopia, but also to neighboring countries. And that by in itself would also help with regional collaboration, regional integration, and also all the benefits that we think for Ethiopia are also available for these other countries as well. So in terms of moving the country and moving also the region forward in terms of satisfying basic necessities like food, water, energy security, it's quite a monumental project. You can also think of it in terms of international agendas or international goals. The UN has the SDGs, what we call the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So these are 17 goals that the UN set for the entire world to reach by 2030. So these 17 goals include reducing poverty, reducing hunger, increasing access to electricity, access to healthcare, access to education, providing decent jobs, fighting climate change, making sustainable cities, providing, developing peace and justice strong institutions, and also collaboration between countries to achieve these goals. So these 17 goals, each and every one of them are directly or indirectly related to access to power, access to energy. And the GERD will be producing affordable, cheap, and moreover clean energy, and quite a lot of it for a country like Ethiopia and a region like the Nile Basin. So you can also think of it in terms of satisfying the SDGs for Ethiopia and also the neighboring regions, and by proxy satisfying the world demands or the global goals that we have in the world. So there are multiple facets that you can look at it.
Let's rush to my second question. And Ethiopian government consistently says the issue of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is the issue of close to 300 million peoples of the region. And that's to say that neighboring countries like Sudan, Djibouti, Kenya, and other African countries are going to be benefited from the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Could you show us how the dam practically benefit peoples of the region?
Absolutely. We can start with electricity and the export of electricity, right? So the main agenda of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is to produce enough energy for Ethiopia and export the rest to neighboring countries. As I mentioned earlier, electricity really is the backbone of an economy, and producing energy, making clean, affordable, and cheap electricity available to these other countries is quite beneficial to them. There are instances where buying electricity from Ethiopia would be cheaper than actually producing electricity in these own countries. So it's quite a cost benefit wise, it's quite a beneficial arrangement if these countries would buy energy from Ethiopia. And then secondly, the dam would be able to control the amount of flooding, especially in Sudan. So flooding damages in Sudan would be highly reduced. The dam also would enable the release of a controlled amount of water throughout the year. That would have implications for irrigation and food security in many of the Nile Basin countries. You can also think about the water storage and the loss and evaporation that would be minimized by storing water in Ethiopia. As we all know, Ethiopia is a highland country. It's relatively evaporation loss from heat is quite minimal in Ethiopia as compared to Sudan or Egypt. Just for comparison, you can see the Ahayas-1 dam in Egypt loses on average from 10 to 15 billion cubic meters every year because of evaporation. In contrast, a huge dam such as the GERD that is built in Ethiopia is only expected to lose from 1.5 to 2 billion cubic meters. So you can just see the loss, the savings in water evaporation that we can incur as a basin as a whole, not just for Ethiopia, but for the whole basin, by storing water, by building the dam in an upstream country, in a colder, in a highland country in Ethiopia. So that's a whole water saving conservation for the basin as a whole. Moreover, storing water in these highland countries also provides a buffer for climate anomalies, right? Climate extremes, whether there's a drought or whether there's a flood. The fact that there is the dam in Ethiopia, in cases of drought, it's a good storage for water. And in cases of flood, because of its size, it has the capacity to attenuate huge floods. So, and that again is a very huge benefit to Sudan and to a lesser extent to Egypt. We can also think about the reduction in sediment flows to Sudan and also in Egypt. These two countries spend millions every year dredging sediment out of their dams. So the Renaissance Dam, the GERD, would reduce sedimentation flow to these downstream dams by as much as 86%. This is a huge capital savings for these two countries, right? We can also think about power uplifts because of the controlled and the regulated flow that would come from the GERD. Sudanese dams would be able to produce more power because of the controlled flow, without actually investing any additional money in their own dams. This is a huge power uplift, especially in Sudan. We can also think about environmental conservation and what the GERD would entail in terms of climate, protecting the climate. We as a country want the GERD to be sustainable, and also we're engaging in projects like, let's say, the Green Legacy, soil and water reclamation, and in general environmental conservation activities, which are quite necessary for our own dams. But these environmental practices are going to have far-reaching impact into the other basin countries as well. So there are multiple benefits that we can think of for these other riparian countries, in addition to the clear sharing of electricity. But you can also think of this integration and the sharing between countries on a broader sense, right? For example, when you think about trade of electricity between two countries, trade of electricity just does not stop at trading electricity, right? Trading requires infrastructure development, trading requires political negotiations, political talks, and trading would therefore pave the way for economic integration and then further political integration. And you can think broadly that this can be a way forward for the bigger Pan-African goal we have as the African continent, right? So these are are baby steps that we can capitalize on to engage in bigger, larger, more audacious goals like Pan-Africanism, let's say.
Yeah. In many of his interviews, which I have watched, Ethiopian Minister of Water, Irrigation and Energy, Dr. Engineer Selesh Bekele, said the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is going to benefit downstream countries such as Sudan and Egypt. Unfortunately, these countries are complaining the construction and the filling of the dam. So I think it's very important to show how does it practically benefit downstream countries of Sudan and Egypt. You have touched one way or other, but I need elaborated answer here.
Okay, well, we can like individually see the benefits. As I mentioned earlier, reduction in flooding is a huge benefit to Sudan because, so as you know, or as many of your viewers know, the Blue Nile is a very seasonal river, which means there are high flows in a few rainy season months and then low flows during other months. So what the GERD would be able to do is, because it stores the water in the huge reservoir it has, there will be controlled amount of flow throughout the year. So you don't expect huge amount of flooding to affect Sudan in the long term. And also, if huge amounts of water come, the reservoir has the capacity to contain that water and not let it flow downstream. So the risk of flooding to Sudan is quite minimized. The other benefit I mentioned earlier was increased irrigation capacity and increased energy production capacity for Sudan and Egypt, right? Because again, it has to do with the controlled amount of flow leaving the dam. So controlled amount of flow all year round will enable Sudanese and Egyptian farmers to produce more than once, more than twice a year, increasing the food capacity. As I mentioned earlier, the other one is sedimentation loss. There are dams in Sudan and Egypt which suffer from sedimentation. As we know, the name of the Blue Nile is Tuqurabai, right? Even from the name, you know, it's a very sediment-laden river. So the fact that the GERD would be able to contain the sediment of the Blue Nile, which means that clean water, in a way, water with less sediment will be able to flow downstream, reducing the sediment load in these downstream dams. That is a huge capital savings, which means Sudan and Egypt don't have to spend millions every year trying to dredge their dams from sediment or engaging in other activities. These are capital savings for these two countries without actually having them invest even 1 cent in this project, right? So these are huge savings. And then you can think about the regional integration and everything that I mentioned in my previous answer as benefits for the whole basin as a whole.
Yeah. Nile is the transboundary river. It passes through 11 African countries such as Ethiopia, Rwanda, Burundi, Sudan, and other African countries. But the countries which claims to have interest, which claims to have right on the Nile are Egypt and sometimes Sudan. How is that fair? That
entitlement and thinking of the Nile as their own and their own only comes from historical circumstances, right? So in the past, the civilization in Egypt was built off of the Nile, and protectorates, colonizers, and a series of governments in Egypt were very intent on making sure that the amount of water flowing to the Nile does not decrease. And because of political instability, because of economic incapacity in the basin, these other basin countries, including Ethiopia, were not able to use the water. So for years, for centuries, they had uncontested use of the water. So it has been building, this entitlement to the water has been building up for like hundreds of years, if not millions of years. So so the entitlement, in the sense of thinking that the Nile is theirs and theirs alone, has its roots in history, in colonialism, and in colonial agreements. But it's a fact that everyone knows the Nile is a transboundary river. The sources of the Nile are in these upstream countries in Ethiopia, and then in the equatorial regions in the Lake Victoria areas. But the use has been limited to these two downstream countries because of economic circumstances. But that won't be the case for long, because climate change is forcing countries to use their resources more judiciously. Population is increasing in all of these countries, and with population increase comes an increased demand for water in all of these countries, right? An increasing population needs increased water for drinking, increased water for sanitation, increased water for food, increased water for industries, right? And it's also not just increased water, but in the future we're expecting a richer. In general, the global population is expected to be richer, which means they would expect a better quality of life, which would need even more water. So the demand for water in all of these basin countries is increasing. Therefore, these other Nile basin countries, which historically have been quite dormant or very silent in terms of the Nile water use, will start looking to the Nile for water as a resource. So in the future, it's not going to stay the same that just Sudan and Egypt are going to use the water or Ethiopia is going to use the water, but no. And this is why that we would need to come up with a shared, collective, equitable and efficient, equitable and reasonable framework of using the Nile water sustainably and in the long term if we want the resource to sustain us. Because right now, the current status quo of using the water just gives the totality of the Nile water to the two countries, Egypt and Sudan, and that's not being used even very sustainably, considering climate change and water efficiency. So historically, you're right, as you said, the Nile has been limited to use predominantly in Egypt and to a lesser extent in Sudan, but that is going to change very quickly because of environmental circumstances.
Yeah. Downstream countries, Egypt and now Sudan, are complaining over the construction and the filling of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. They say like Ethiopia has not participated as a riparian countries. Are they right? What's your assessment here?
Well, if we're talking about the GERD, the only countries concerned are Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt by proxy of, by virtue of where the dam is located and the impacts of the dam, right? The dam is not a transboundary dam. The dam is a sovereign dam that is built on the land of Ethiopia by the resources of Ethiopia, on the waters of Ethiopia. However, the dam is built on a transboundary rivers which traverses across Sudan and Egypt, and because of that, Sudan and Egypt are also in the conversation. If we're talking about the Nile River as a whole, though, or water allocation or water use in the Nile Basin as a whole, then it is true that we would need to involve all the other, 8 riparian countries in the talks, and which is what happened in the Cooperative Framework Agreement. But what's happening in the GERD is different from water allocation. It's agreement, or it's a dealing on a specific sovereign national project, so there's absolutely no need to involve these other countries. I would see a role for them in maybe negotiating or in terms of helping the talks between these 3 countries, but that's up to them. But as a matter of principle, the GERD does not touch, let's say, Kenya or Uganda, so there's actually no need to involve them. The 3 countries that are directly related to the GERD are Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt, and that's why the discussions are limited to these 3 countries. But if we want to expand the discussions happening on the GERD to a broader water use of the Nile Basin or to a broader water allocation scheme, then in that case, yes, we would need to involve the other basin countries as well.
Yeah, finally, do you see any solution other than cooperation regarding the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, regarding the issue of the Nile dispute?
No, absolutely no. There is no other way than cooperation. Water is a basic necessity, right? So you have to secure it, and it's not something that can be secured by force or by coercion. No. Every country, every citizen, every person has the right to the basic right, the human right to water and to other basic necessities that access to water and access to energy can provide. So it's a basic necessity to every country in the basin, to everybody in the world, and not just for 2 particular countries or 1 particular country. So we only have a limited amount of resource in the basin, right? The annual flow of the Nile is known. We don't know what climate change is how climate change is going to affect the flow of the water. We don't know the future projections. We don't know how big the future demands in the basin are going to be. So there's no way but to cooperate and use try to use the water sustainably and together, to make sure that the Nile River serves all of the basin countries in the long term, rather than other than cooperation, right? Force really has no place in dealing with water. Water is a basic necessity. Water is a human right. It's a civilian commodity. There's no place for force here, and I don't think any country would seriously think that war or force would be a feasible action when it comes to water, because water is the source of life. You cannot secure the source of life by taking life, or by thinking of war as a feasible agreement. And as far as I know, from the Ethiopian side, dialogue and conversation has been the only option on the table, and I hope the other countries approach the issue from the same mindset as well. Dialogue is the only way forward, but for dialogue to work, the underlying premise, what you mentioned earlier, this entitlement of thinking of the Nile as one country's own resource, or thinking of the Nile waters as historical rights, these things have to change. These things don't really have any place in modern history. The tenets, the principles of international transboundary water sharing are three. First is equitable and reasonable use for all riparian countries. Second is the obligation not to cause significant harm. And third is the duty to cooperate. These are the guiding principles. There is no historical right in international law. There is no hegemonic status where two countries or one country gets the lion's share and the other countries get absolutely nothing. These things can't stand in the face of international law or in the face of modern transboundary water sharing rules. So for dialogue is the only way possible, the only way forward for these Nile Basin countries to go forward. But for the dialogue to work, the underlying premise, the underlying assumptions that these countries bring to the table has to be based on equitable and reasonable use, and the duty to cooperate and the duty to cause no significant harm. If we have this premise in mind, the scientific community has shown that there are numerous ways to use the water collaboratively, effectively, sustainably in the long term. So the issue is not on how to use the water, but the premise that these countries hold, especially with Egypt and Sudan, this entitlement, that has to go. The understanding that the Nile is a transboundary river, and each and every country, all 11 countries, have an equal share, a fair share to the Nile waters, has to be the basis of dialogue and communication.
Yeah. I have finished all of my proposed question to you. Do you have anything to say in the final? Might be message to Ethiopians, to the Ethiopian government or other concerned bodies?
What can I say? Well, I would like to say for the Ethiopian community to keep up the good work of advocating for the GERD and advocating for the equitable use or equitable share of Ethiopia's Nile rights, that things are changing because the public is speaking out. In the past, the Nile, and still today, the Nile is talked of in the perspective of Egypt. You talk about the Nile and Egypt pops up in people's mind. Not a lot of people know that the Nile, the majority of the Nile originates from Ethiopia. Not a lot of people know that there are 11 countries in the Nile Basin. We have to tell our side of the story. We have to reclaim the narrative. We have to tell that what the GERD means to us, what the Nile means to us, and why we need to develop this project, particularly the GERD, and in the larger sense, the Nile Basin as a whole, the Blue Nile Basin, the Abai Basin as a whole for us. We are talking about a resource that accounts for 70% of Ethiopia's surface water resource. The waters of the Nile River account for 70% of Ethiopia's our water resource. That's a huge amount, right? So there's no way we can push Ethiopia further economically, socially, politically, without actually capitalizing the resources in the basin. It's a basin that crosses 6 out of the 10 regional states now, right? So a majority of our people are directly or indirectly related to this basin and this water in one way or another. 50 million people directly live in the basin, so it's really a mass. That's like half our population. 110 million, 50 million is almost half our population. So we're not talking about just one river or just one basin. We're talking about a significant portion of the country's resource. So it's absolutely a must. It's an absolute matter of existence for us, as Ethiopians, to develop this river basin. So we need to counter the narrative that GERD is just a developmental project or a luxury project that Ethiopia is doing to become a power hegemon or a powerhouse in the basin. No, for us it's a matter of existence. For us it's a matter of a dignified life. For us it's a matter of having a better future, right? So I would really urge you guys, the media, the public, international community, also people in the international community, Ethiopians in the international community, the diaspora, to keep on doing the good work and spreading Ethiopia's narrative, Ethiopia's perspective to the wider public until Ethiopia's equitable and reasonable right to the fair share of the Nile waters and also all our transboundary waters is safe.
Well said. Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is existential issue for Ethiopians. Mekedlawit Messaye, PhD student at Florida International University from the United States of America. Many thanks for your time and dedication. Thank you for sharing your deeper perspective and knowledge regarding topic of our discussion, Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the toughest issues of our time. Mekedlawit, really thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Dear viewers, that brings us to the end of our program for today. Many thanks for watching, and please do stay with the rest of our programs.